subsidized visitation centers where fathers must pay up to $80 an hour to visit their own children under the gaze of social workers. These are fathers who are accused of no wrongdoing, not even accused of wrongdoing, let alone convicted, must pay in institutions to visit their children. A good example, I mean, I could give you thousands of examples. Len Misculin in Britain launched a hunger strike in December 2000 in protest against being cut off from his children by a family court. His ordeal was described in Britain's Daily Mail newspaper. And the British family courts responded by imposing a gag order against him and prohibiting not just publication but dissemination of any information about the case. So presumably email also could be prosecuted criminally for spreading information. This is not limited to the United States, by the way. Countries with a long common law tradition of civil liberties and civil rights similar to ours, such as Britain, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, have unusually harsh penalties against fathers, again, who are accused of no wrongdoing. In Australia, the US, and Britain, family courts have closed websites operated by fathers groups. Britain, Australia, and Canada have all resurrected archaic laws that make it a crime to criticize family court judges. And an astounding example of how confiscation of property is used to punish free speech, Jim Wagner of the Georgia Council for Children's Rights, and this fits nicely, I think, with our theme about petitioning the government. Jim Wagner was following he gave testimony to a U.S. congressional committee on family court civil rights violations. He was immediately stripped of custody of his two children, ordered to pay $6,000 in the fees of an attorney he had not hired, and jailed within 15 days when he couldn't pay. The 13th Amendment, prohibition of slavery. Fathers are routinely ordered into employment and their wages are confiscated. California ruling a couple of years ago overturned, again, centuries of common law precedent that said that Congress had put it beyond debate that no indebtedness warrants the suspension of a right to be free from compulsory service. This overturns it. Habeas corpus. Fathers are routinely jailed without knowing the charges against them. Perhaps the most notorious, the Elizabeth Morgan case, the sensational case in the 90s. She was jailed for 2 years without being formally charged. I can give you numerous other cases. The contract clause of the Constitution is violated by no-fault divorce laws, which allow simply for the abrogation of the marriage contract without any reason given. The ex post facto laws are routinely violated. Again, no-fault divorce. You can be, if you're married under a regime of traditional marriage, you can be divorced under no-fault divorce, so it changes the law after the fact. Perhaps the most astounding, the Child Support Recovery Act of 1992 criminalized child support arrearages that were not criminal at the time that they were incurred. Bills of attainder, astoundingly, one of the most obscure elements of aspects of our Constitution, routinely violated. The Deadbeat Parents Punishment Act singled out a sector of the population for punishment by congressional decree. Just last month, again, the Elizabeth Morgan case, in this case her husband, the court admitted 6 or 7 years after the case that her husband, Eric Fortek, had been effectively punished by an act of attainder. Congress decreed him by legislative vote. They decreed him to be a child molester. He was never tried for being a child molester. There was no evidence that he was a child molester, but Congress decided he was a child molester. A classic act of attainder. Of course, the damage is done now. His daughter is grown. He has no right to see her, and she hates him. It's unbelievable what is going on here. The presumption of innocence, I mentioned that the National Conference of Civil Liberty of State Legislatures has pointed out that fathers can be presumed guilty until they prove their own innocence. I could go on about this. I could give you numerous examples about this. What's really striking though about what's going on with fathers is I think it's a marvelous parallel with what's going on here and with what We the People and Bob Schultz and you are doing about the income tax. Because one of the striking things about it is the way that what's been created here is a financial mechanism to drive the violation to drive tyranny and the violation of rights. Every free society, every democracy, every free republic, you're going to find violations of people's rights. It's inevitable. It's bound to happen, miscarriages of justice. What strikes me as what's truly dangerous and why I really applaud the work you're doing is that violations of rights become systemic when you find a way to pay for it. It's one thing to have isolated violations of rights, but when you have a financial mechanism such as the income tax,